Hey everybody, it's Trey Martinez, Fischer. Welcome to Politex. I know it's been a little while. It's been a few weeks. So those of you who've been following Texas politics, it's been pretty crazy this last month. And so, apologies for having to go dark on you a little bit, but I've got plenty of stuff to talk about. So we're going to have a great few shows lined up, anywhere from sort of the final days of legislative session, sort of give you a inside perspective. And we're going to talk about things that ran up until to our historic quorum break, and then we'll spend some time talking about the actual behind the scenes, all that occurs when you break a quorum, and then of course, in the aftermath of that quorum, just sort of launching on the national stage and really bringing a conversation from Texas that spoke to the rest of the nation and reinvigorated a national discussion on voting rights, taking many of us to Washington, D.C. to meet with Senate and House leaders, and also to have a visit and a one-on-one meeting with the Vice President of the United States. So all really good stuff. We're probably going to have to break that up over the course of a few podcasts, but we're going to make it fun. We're going to make it interesting. We're going to bring perspective from some of my colleagues. We have lots to discuss. So listen, we look forward to re-engaging with you. Looking forward to just a little bit of normalcy. I'm back in San Antonio now. And of course, we know the governor has called a special session for July 8th. We'll deal with that. We'll talk about that too. But I obviously want to hear from you. I want to know what's on your mind. I want to know what we can talk about, what's happening here locally in San Antonio. For those of you that are following this pod all over the state, what's happening in your community? What can we do to engage together? So listen, look forward to it. I hope you're enjoying your summer. Thank you for supporting Politex. Keep following us on social media, and that's at TMFTX on both Facebook and on Twitter. Looking forward to connecting again. Let's have a great show. Hey everybody, we're back. This is my special guest. This is Representative Jasmine Crockett. You've met her once before. Very interesting woman, I will tell you. Coming into the legislature, very interesting time. So Jasmine, as you know, is a first-term lawmaker out of Dallas, Texas. She's a civil rights lawyer, practicing lawyer, and also a lawmaker. She's new to the legislature, but definitely not new to politics, not new to community organizing, community engagement. Somebody who brings what I think is a real-world perspective to her lawmaking. And so, Jasmine, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, even though it's really early in the morning.
Early in the morning, looks like you're in a hotel room, and
I am. But I'm doing people's work. I am in Houston because I was on a CLE panel to give a legislative update. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. But we're about to do a little update ourselves. Now this show, is a total behind the scenes, no filter. People really like it because of that. They think sometimes politics is too scripted, and this is a way to talk to real people, let them understand exactly what's going on in real time. And so let's set the stage. You are a first-term lawmaker, and I'm in my 10th term, as you know, and what folks always say is that when you're brand new to the legislature, it's almost better to be seen and not to be heard. Obviously, that's not your style, and that's what makes you you. But tell us, did you think coming into the session as a first-term lawmaker that you would find yourself being one of the primary organizers and instigators that organized a historic quorum break?
I absolutely did not see that as my role. I will say that was probably the highlight of this session for me, is the walkout in general. But I absolutely thought that we would come in and we would deal with real issues, right? I was coming in at a time that we were experiencing a once in a lifetime pandemic. And so healthcare should have been front and center. Also, in the midst of trying to deal with the pandemic here in the state of Texas, we ended up finding out about a little thing known as ERCOT, something that I did not have on my agenda whatsoever when I walked in, did not know what ERCOT was, still have questions about what all ERCOT does. But, I thought, man, we've got this winter storm, we've lost 700 people. We're gonna focus on making sure that we provide energy, considering the fact that we are in the energy capital, right? I thought we would make sure that the basics were met. Energy, make sure that housing needs were met in the midst of the pandemic, make sure that healthcare was met, make sure that educational needs were met. And I would give the ledge a F on all fronts.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, look, you talked about the winter storm, 4.5 million people in the state lost power, 15 million people lost running water. We pressed them and pressed them to just adopt national standards. I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's much colder in North Dakota. It's much colder in Iowa. And guess what? Those pipes didn't freeze in the winter storm because they followed national standards. They weatherize their transmission. And so all of that being said, we leave session, folks tell us, oh, no, the grid is fixed. You and I find ourselves in Washington, D.C., meeting with national lawmakers on voting rights. And lo and behold, we get these warnings to conserve power because the grid is on the verge of collapsing. So, not focusing on real issues. And then, of course, we're chasing we have these solutions looking for problems. And that's what voting rights and that's what SB 7, I guess, is supposed to be. And you and I have talked about this, Jasmine. I mean, there is a problem with voting. The problem is that people are actually voting. And those in charge, Republicans, are looking at that tally and they're recognizing that they don't like how people are voting. They don't like those trend lines. And so, Texas, once again, wants to make it harder for people to register to vote. They want to make it harder for people to go out and vote. And then they want to make it harder for older Texans to vote by mail or get a ride or get assistance. And then, of course, if that wasn't scary enough, they want to put folks in a room with a video camera and literally look over your shoulder and videotape you while you're in the election booth, which is, something that I've never seen in a real democracy.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because when you said that it's a solution looking for a problem, we do know what the problem is. The problem is that Democrats are voting. The problem is that Democrats aren't so convinced that this is quote unquote a red state anymore. We saw what happened in Georgia. I think that they are definitely afraid of the fact that people may say, well, wait a minute, maybe my vote will count, right? When we look at the presidential election, we're talking about a 6-point spread. If we go back just a couple of cycles, there was a double-digit spread between the presidential candidates, with the Republican having a double-digit lead. And so these numbers are coming closer and closer. Our state continues to grow. We are picking up 2 additional congressional seats. We actually should have picked up 3. We know that historically there is a significant undercount when it comes to Black and Brown people, but we also know that the majority of the growth over the last 10 years has been really brown. Brown definitely took the lead like none other. I believe the number is close to 50% or 60%. It's really high up there. The majority of the growth was definitely brown. And right behind them was Black growth. Texas also has more African Americans than any other state. But when you look at the state house floor, it looks nothing like the state of Texas. And that's because of good old gerrymandering. That's because of the fact that Texas does make it harder than all other 49 states to vote in general. So the fact that we want to go even further right now is absolutely insane. Another problem that I would denote is the fact that honestly, we need to expand upon access. We do need to make sure that the ballot box is more accessible, especially in our urban centers, which tend to be blue. Yeah, no. So working families in these areas, maybe they can't get to the polling locations by 7 p.m. Maybe they do need a few extra hours. Maybe they do need more options as it relates to being able to drop off your ballot by mail or your ballot that you receive by mail. There's a lot of things and a lot of opportunity, and we saw Harris County do a really good job of expanding access, but it did not decrease the security of that election. The drive-through voting was an amazing solution for those that have little ones and they don't want the little ones standing in line with them, getting anxious. Instead, they could actually just sit in the car and drive up and vote. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that, except for everyday working families are actually able to participate in the process. And we know that if working families are participating, chances are they are voting democratically.
Well, you can't see this, but Matt, the producer's kind of off camera and, he's kind of looking at me and his mouth's all wide open. And we're kind of freaking out because you're not supposed to know this much stuff. I mean, we're just wowed about how all of this election data, all of this. I mean, I think about when I was a freshman in 2001, I mean, it's, the legislature is overwhelming. I mean, it is a huge learning curve. And, I joined straight out of law school and, I thought, well, hey, I can, I'm a lawyer, so I'll be able to just sort of breeze through this process. And it's a tough process. It's a tough process. So we're just wowed over here that you're just spitting all this data at me. Like, I should be taking notes. You should be doing the pod. I should be the one writing the notes. And so let's talk about that. So we've got this crazy voter bill, and I'll set the stage. And when the House took up the version of this voting bill was House Bill 6, we shut it down. And the chamber stopped for an entire day. And we had national news cameras everywhere. Everybody was looking for fireworks. And the Speaker of the House said, we're not going to be Georgia. We're not going to do this crazy hyper-partisan voting. And literally, we spent the whole day rewriting it, negotiating in good faith, Democrats in the back room, working with Republicans. And you and I have often said the compromise on House Bill 6 sort of took all the sharp edges off the bill. Like nobody was going to commit a felony for making a mistake in House Bill 6. And so that bill passes, it goes to the Senate. They just throw that bill in the garbage can. That's essentially what they did. They kick out Senate Bill 7, which was horrible. And of course, because the two sides didn't agree, it goes to this conference, this, and 5 senators, 5 House members, they're supposed to get in a room and work out the differences. And then at some juncture, we started hearing from our Democrats in the Senate and our Democrats in the House that they're being left out of these conversations. And Senate Bill 7 is not getting better, it's getting worse. And people don't have any input in the process. Democrats are being ignored. And you and I and others started thinking something's up. We started, having some concerns about this. At some juncture, folks were ready to go nuclear, and you were one of them. So why don't you tell our audience, like, what were you feeling right around the time when we saw this voting bill getting uglier, Republicans more determined to pass it, and Democrats having no voice in the process? What was kind of going through your mind back then?
Honestly, what was going through my mind is that we should have killed the bill the first time. For the listeners, there is a procedural tool that we use in the House, and it's called a point of order. It is similar to what you see attorneys use in a court of law when they say objection. And then a judge has to rule whether or not that objection will be overruled or sustained. And so we actually had the power in our hands to actually kill this bill. Now, to say that a bill is killed is kind of a relative term because a bill has the ability to come back to life. And so there was still time left on the clock for this bill to come back. But as we saw over and over and over this session, we may not have had the brawn, but we had all of the brain power on the Democratic side. And so we did have the ability to kill that bill. I thought it was another opportunity, especially if they were going to rush this bill through, another opportunity for them to make a mistake and to give us yet another chance to kill this bill. Consistently, we saw good faith negotiations that occurred on the House side only to be ignored on the Senate side. And so I won't, let's say, talk too badly about the House Republicans because the majority of the issues that we really ran into were because of the Senate Republicans. The House Republicans, I would say, did negotiate in good faith, but we saw what kept happening. And so the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And so my concern was, when we send this bill over, what guarantees do we have that these amendments will stay on this bill? And I did not really receive the answer that I thought I would receive from the lawyers that negotiated this. And so I was concerned that we would end up in the circumstances that we would. And so, considering the fact that it took them to the last day to get this bill ready, I don't know what would have happened if we would have went ahead and bought some extra time by killing that bill initially. But I was definitely feeling like I don't want to negotiate. At this point, it really felt like we were negotiating with terrorists. They continued to terrorize us as we were trying to be upstanding, good statesmen, so to speak. We tried that over and over and over, yet we continued to get brutalized. We continue to get beat down. And so at that point, I was like, we're done talking. It's time to get to walking.
So look, tell us real quick. I mean, because you were one of the early sort of thought leaders in wanting to break quorum. And I know, if I was writing a book, I would remember, sometime around April that Representative Jarvis Johnson was talking, at least he was talking to me about breaking quorum. You weren't too far off from that April date. I mean, what made you think of that, and why did you feel we needed to go there?
I actually had to talk to senior leadership because it was my first year. So I don't know about all the rules, right? But I was like, do we not have any options? Do we have to keep taking this? So I was very frustrated with the defund movement. As a civil rights lawyer, all of this quote unquote back the blue, we're going to defund cities who defund the police nonsense. That really got me going. I was very concerned and upset about the bail, quote unquote, reform bills as someone that does criminal defense work as well. I think that the conversations began to take a little bit more form when the anti-trans legislation was up. Celia and I talked, as well as Gina Hinojosa, and I talked. There were a number of us, and I'm like, dude, we should have been gone. Like, let's kill the rest of this nonsense, right? Like, we had guns, we had everything, we had abortion. I was just like, I just want to go. But there were some senior leaders that said, yeah, it's a possibility, but not really, right? Like, it doesn't really happen. It's only happened 3 times. And I'm like, well, it seems like this is a good time. Everybody keeps saying this is the worst session. Like, why are we sitting here, right? Like, people that have been here for so long are saying this is just as bad as it gets. I'm thinking, well, this sounds like a really good time to break quorum. And so, I didn't really know how many members would really be on board. And even on that day, the day that we broke quorum, we still didn't know really how many members were really on board. We didn't really get to do, like one-on-one in-depth conversations, with every single member to make sure that we could get this done. But I think that no matter what area you came from, no matter how long you've been in office, I think that this bill was so offensive and such a slap in our face. And all of the hard work that had been done, the good faith negotiations that had taken place, I think everybody was just weary and thought, man, this is the very foundation of democracy. This is how we exist. This is how we make sure that our voices are heard, specifically in our districts, right? And they're trying to silence our districts specifically, or put targets on their backs and make them felons, or invite these poll watchers, these partisan poll watchers, for the purpose of intimidation. This, I think, really ended up resonating with everyone in the fact that there's nothing that we can do because we have tried everything. We have done everything by the book, and it's gotten us nowhere. And so, it finally did come together. And honestly, this was a mistake on behalf of the Republicans. I don't believe that we would have walked on that bill, but for them changing it. I believe that if the version that it left the House was, somewhat similar to what they sent back, I think we would have stayed. We still would have voted against it, but we would have felt like it wasn't as big of an assault, and it was something that we would just fight the rest of it in court.
Well, interesting. Well, you make a good point. I mean, breaking quorum is not easy. I was a sophomore in 2003 when we broke quorum, and I had a minor role, and that was to help organize members of the Bexar County delegation that were going to break quorum. We had one member who wasn't going to do it. And so, but I will tell you, it took a week of planning. At least when I was involved, I had a week to complete an assignment, and there were folks working on it before then. And then also sort of, fun fact that if you ever watch that old video footage of Ardmore, Oklahoma, you'll see a bus that says San Antonio City Tours. Well, that was a bus I helped procure because we had a bus breakdown in the middle of our quorum break, and we had to bring one out of San Antonio. So that's my small contribution. But this quorum break, even though it was talked about as early as April, really didn't come to a fever pitch until about, a little less than 24 hours before the time that we did it. And that by itself is amazing. As a matter of fact, just on the other side of this door is where I sat with you on a Zoom call on Saturday, the exactly 25 hours from the time that Senate Bill 7 would be eligible for debate. We sat on a Zoom with about 10 other colleagues of ours, all minority, and we sort of listened, and it was really an opportunity. It was kind of like a family meeting. And I knew right away, just listening to people talking, that, we were just beat down. We were defeated. We felt like we've been duped. This spirit of bipartisanship all of a sudden evaporated. The stakes were very high. Our constituents were going to get hurt severely by these voting reforms. And I think, it's fair for people to understand, like at least 100 pages of new language was inserted into the proposal in the dead of night that today nobody takes responsibility for. That's just insane. Like, the most discriminatory language that you'll find in Senate Bill 7 was written in the dead of night, put into the bill, signed by Republicans, and now nobody wants to take credit for that language. And in fact, they're trying to discredit that language and walk it back. And so here we are 25 hours out from this, quorum break. You're a freshman. Did you think we were going to be able to pull it off?
I didn't know. I really didn't know. I don't have the benefit of really knowing the caucus members on a level that senior members know them. I could look back at history. I could see who was here when the 2003 quorum break occurred. And oddly enough, there were definitely a number of members that went to Ardmore, but decided not to break quorum this time. So, all I could look back at was history, and obviously history was no help. But what I could do is I could actually engage in conversations, especially with those members that are in my class, and ask them about their willingness. And I think because this was our first session and we really weren't used to the abusive nature of the House, I think that it was a lot easier for us to say we would walk, in addition to the fact that there just wasn't any encumbrance that was upon us. We didn't have to worry about positions of leadership. We didn't really have that many bills, if any, that we were worried about. And so, our only focus was very purely on this particular bill. And so we didn't have some of the noise or some of the distractions or some of the other concerns maybe that senior members had. And so it was very easy to engage in the conversations with my classmates about breaking quorum. It was like an easy yes. And then I had engaged in those conversations before on the anti-trans legislation, trying to see who was willing to break quorum then. I assumed if they were willing to break quorum then, they were willing to break quorum this time. And so I engaged in some more of those conversations with persons that had indicated to me that they would walk on the anti-trans legislation if we were unable to kill it. And so speaking to some of those members, they reaffirmed that this was yet another issue that they were willing to walk on. So I knew that there were some. I did not know if we would have 50. We definitely needed, a good 50 to get it done though. And I was very pleased to find out that we had. What most people don't realize is that we weren't in the building when it was officially determined that quorum had been broken. There was a news reporter that was on my phone and said, "Hey, what's going on? There's not that many people on the floor. This last vote, the numbers were kind of low." And he was asking me at that moment, "Are you guys breaking quorum?" I said, "Well, we're trying." And so literally in that moment, I could hear the stream in the background from the floor, and I could hear Charlie Guerin calling the point of order. And the reporter then told me, "You guys did it. Like, there's no quorum." And it was the best feeling I think I've had all session long.
So we have about 2 minutes left, and let's walk in your shoes. Why don't you tell our audience? It's one thing to break a quorum, and obviously everybody can look back and know that we did. But like you said, on that day, it was getting people out of the building, getting people to pull their keys. And that's the key that we use to vote, which, is the way you prove that you're not there. Tell our listeners, what did you do that day? What was Jasmine's job the day we broke quorum?
Yeah, so I definitely, number one, when the day began, we had a number of meetings. We had approximately 3 official meetings that day. And at the very first meeting, I was definitely saying, hey, what does the interest look like? Can we get a head count? And we were not allowed to get a head count. And then the second meeting, I asked again, hey, can we get a head count? Because I wanted to know, if the numbers are even there. I mean, it was not worth talking about, not worth toiling over if we didn't really have enough interest or close to enough interest. So at that second meeting, while I wasn't able to get a head count, there was an agreement that the whipping system would be used to determine whether or not we actually did have the numbers. And there was a little snafu in that, so to speak. But ultimately, in the third meeting, we were told that 48 to 49 members had agreed to be willing to walk. And so, we couldn't really afford to lose any members. We started walking off the floor at different times so as to not be obvious. So there wasn't a mass exodus. And the majority of us were in a senior member's office, Eddie Rodriguez. And so senior members have big offices. That's why we were in his office. So there was actually space. So we're sitting in his office and we're watching the floor. And there was a vote that came up. And with that vote, there were 114 people that voted. And we're like, what is going on? And so, we looked at the vote sheet to see who voted. And some of those members had actually walked. And so we're like, what the heck? So, we realized somebody voted their desk. So at that point in time, Gina Hinojosa goes downstairs to start pulling keys out. But we're also looking at the floor and we're trying to determine what members are on the floor and, are these members that really should be walking? And so a number of us started making phone calls, sending text messages like, hey, get off the floor. There were actually a couple of members I had to call in senior membership to help me out. I'm like, hey, this one will not go. Will you call like right now and tell this one they need to go? And so I did that. So I had to call in for some reinforcements because here it is, the freshman is the one that's messing with senior members, telling them to leave. But ultimately, it really was a group effort and it was an uprising. This wasn't a leadership on down effort. This was something from members such as a freshman like me and other members that didn't necessarily hold leadership positions that decided that this was what was best to do. And leadership followed us. And I couldn't be more thankful for the senior members that really orchestrated, organized, and really pushed this effort despite some of the pushback that we got from senior leadership.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Well, listen, that wraps up this segment. I definitely want to bring you back and talk about, things we did after quorum, because I think you got a very, you got a very unique perspective. I think you're going to have a very boring sophomore season because you've done it all in your first term. I mean, I hate to give you the spoiler alert, but I don't know if we can top this in your sophomore season. So, well, listen, everybody, we'll thank you, Jasmine Crockett, for number one, sacrificing yourself to serve in the legislature. I want to thank you for your leadership, and number three, I want to thank you for just being fearless. I think that one of the things that you notice in the legislature is that we've got folks that are very talented, lots of great ideas, but sometimes there's that fear, their hesitancy to be bold, and when it came down to making a decision to break quorum, there was no backing down from you. So I want to thank you for that. I think your constituents need to know that. I think people who watch this pod need to understand just who is Jasmine Crockett. So Jasmine, thank you for being on this show. Okay, everybody, that about wraps it up. I want to thank my special guest for joining me on this show. I want to thank you for supporting Politics, and we look forward to engaging with you next week. Always, you can connect with us at TMFTX on Facebook and on Twitter. Have a great week.